The exterior axis, a framework for how the world acts. An essay from the Ghosts movement. A life is not shaped only from the inside, for all the force of presence, memory, and the quiet steadiness beneath story, the entire domain of the interior axis, another truth presses with equal weight. The world acts upon a life, not occasionally, not symbolically, but continuously and often, without regard for awareness, intention, or care. It presses, permits, punishes, and allows through forces that do not negotiate, do not evaluate intent, and do not distribute themselves according to merit. To speak honestly about lived reality requires naming this outer action as clearly as the inner one. The exterior axis exists for this reason. It does not replace the interior work of presence and recognition, nor does it compete with it. It maps the terrain on which interior life is lived. Where the interior axis speaks to what it is like to be here, the exterior axis speaks to what happens regardless of how present someone may be. The two axes cross, but they do not merge. Awareness does not dissolve circumstance, and circumstance does not erase awareness. Both are real, and both shape a life at the same time. The exterior axis is expressed through 4 interdependent conditions. These are not stages, virtues, or moral categories. They are not earned, promised, or evenly distributed. They are the primary ways in which the world's action, its gravity, and its grace appears in real time and in real lives. I. Constraint, the terrain that exists before choice. Life does not begin at the moment it becomes aware of itself. It begins inside conditions that are already active, already shaping, already exerting pressure on what will later be called choice. The body is the first constraint. It is not a neutral container for will. It is an active condition that sets thresholds long before decisions are made. Capacity is not evenly distributed. Energy does not regenerate at the same rate. Some bodies absorb strain and continue. Others accumulate fatigue quietly until collapse arrives without a clear event. The body determines the width of a day, how long attention can be held, how much interruption can be tolerated. When that width narrows, the world does not narrow with it. Expectations remain fixed. What changes is the cost of participation. The family system is a pre-existing world. Roles are assigned early, often without speech. One child learns to stay quiet, another to perform competence, another to absorb tension. These are adaptive responses rather than choices. Some families buffer impact and provide margin. Others operate under such strain that responsibility arrives not as virtue, but as necessity. This shapes posture, reflex, and nervous system long before it shapes belief. What is learned here becomes the default way of relating to demand, readiness to carry more than is reasonable, the sense that need is dangerous, that rest is undeserved. The internal structure does not automatically update when external conditions improve. Place is an active force, not a backdrop. Infrastructure, distance, pollution, and access to power are not abstract advantages, but concrete conditions that shape risk. Some places offer margin, others extract energy simply to remain functional. Time is lost to distance. Health is eroded by environment. Opportunity thins without ever formally closing. Systems are designed for scale rather than responsiveness. They flatten experience into categories. They reward compliance rather than accuracy. When something goes wrong, there is no single place to address it. Responsibility disperses, and accountability dissolves. Waiting becomes a condition in itself. Class operates as pressure rather than identity. It determines how much room exists when something breaks. It dictates whether time can be reclaimed, whether rest is allowed, whether illness cascades into catastrophe. Scarcity consumes attention and forces prioritization that looks like personal limitation, only if the surrounding conditions are ignored. Timing cannot be chosen, No one selects their historical moment. Some arrive during expansion, others during contraction. Structures that once offered stability harden or disappear. What once required persistence now requires luck. What once rewarded effort now punishes it. These forces intersect. They do not arrive one at a time. They stack. Constraint compounds and repeats. There is no clear line where freedom ends and constraint begins. Only accumulation. Small limitations gather. Missed opportunities cluster. Fatigue becomes baseline. Life narrows without closure. Constraint is not tragedy, and it is not failure. It is the structural fact that some paths are narrower than others from the outset, and that effort alone does not flatten terrain. 2. Consequence, the weight that time carries. There is a widespread assumption that the difficulty of a decision lies in the moment it is made. This belief is persistent, and it is wrong. The decision is brief. What follows is not. The decision ends. Consequence begins. Consequence is not the immediate aftermath, not the argument, the emotional surge, or the visible rupture. Those moments are contained in time. Consequence is what continues long after the moment has passed, when attention has shifted and the body has returned to ordinary routines, carrying a change that will not reverse. It is what keeps landing when there is nothing left to explain. Consequence migrates. It appears later in forms that no longer resemble the original moment. A sentence spoken once becomes a closed door years later. A silence held in one room becomes a pattern that shapes an entire life. A departure made out of necessity becomes a permanent absence in someone else's future. Time does not preserve cause and effect neatly. It disperses them. There is no ethical structure inside consequence. It does not evaluate intention. It does not register care, reluctance, necessity, or sincerity. These matter deeply to the person who acted, but they do not govern how outcomes unfold. Consequence does not distinguish between what was done carefully and what was done carelessly. It does not soften because someone struggled. It operates through interaction, exposure, and continuation rather than judgment. This is why consequence so often feels disproportionate. A person can speak honestly and lose safety. Another can remain silent and inherit damage later. A person can act decisively and be punished for it. Another can refuse to act and be implicated anyway. None of these outcomes complete a moral arc. None offer balance. Awareness does not interrupt consequence. Understanding does not slow it. Recognition does not buy time. Awareness rarely arrives at the beginning of consequence. It often arrives in the middle. Silence is one of the most underestimated sources of consequence. Silence feels passive. It feels like restraint. It feels like nothing happening. Yet silence is an action with delayed impact. It allows trajectories to continue unchallenged. It teaches systems and people to expect no interruption. It creates futures by default. Silence does not avoid consequence. It defers it. Consequence is not punishment. It is not a lesson. It is not a story with an ending. It is the mechanism through which time accrues weight. Third, latitude, the room that allows movement. Some lives survive being shaken while others do not. This difference is often explained in terms that keep responsibility close to the individual: resilience, grit, strength. These explanations are incomplete. What separates these lives is not what they contain internally, but what surrounds them. Some lives are held inside conditions that allow strain without immediate fracture. Others are not. The same pressure is applied, the same mistake is made, and the outcomes diverge sharply. This difference is not freedom, justice, or reward. It is room. When room exists, life continues after difficulty. Things go wrong and are repaired. Errors are absorbed. Consequences arrive slowly, partially, or in forms that can be managed. Time stretches rather than snaps. Life remains negotiable. Where there is no room, life behaves differently. Events stack without pause. Decisions harden quickly. There is little space between a misstep and a defining outcome. Recovery does not appear between impacts. What might have been a moment elsewhere becomes a verdict here. The body again plays a central role. Latitude appears first here. Some bodies recover. They take injury, exhaustion, or illness and return close enough to baseline that life remains adjustable. Others do not. Damage accumulates. Pain becomes background. Energy narrows. Recovery itself is a margin that allows reflection, learning, and recalibration. When the body returns, a person can afford to misjudge and try again. When it does not, every decision is constrained by what can no longer be absorbed. Money alters how time behaves. Financial buffer creates distance between a mistake and its full impact. It allows rest after strain, recovery after loss, and choice after error. It turns catastrophe into inconvenience and urgency into delay. Without it, consequences arrive immediately. Illness becomes crisis. A misjudgment becomes unemployment. Life accelerates in the wrong direction, with no pause for adjustment. Networks function as social buffer. A person with connections rarely meets consequence alone. There is advice, advocacy, opportunity, and informal protection. Falls are caught before they reach the ground. Without these networks, the same fall lands unmediated. Institutions quietly distribute room. Some forget. Others remember indefinitely. Some delay judgment. Others escalate rapidly. Some allow correction. Others convert error into permanent record. These systems determine whether a person remains in motion or becomes fixed. Latitude is not stable. It can disappear through illness, economic shift, policy change, or relational rupture. A life that once bent can later break. This fragility is part of why latitude often goes unnamed. It feels permanent until it vanishes. Latitude is not created by attitude or virtue. It is granted by circumstance. Many lives move forward not because they are stronger, wiser, or more deserving, but because they are allowed to wobble without being destroyed. 4. Continuance. The condition of non-escalation. Some lives do not improve, and yet they do not collapse further. This is difficult to speak about because it offers no virtue and no lesson. It does not reward endurance, honesty, or insight. It names a condition that becomes visible only in hindsight, when time has passed and nothing followed. This is continuance. It is not healing. Healing implies repair, coherence, or return. Continuance is flatter and harder to honour. The damage remains. The loss does not transform. The mistake is not redeemed. A person may still carry weight, confusion, or regret without compensating clarity. Yet the future does not organise itself around that moment. The past stays in the past, not because it was integrated, but because the world did not insist on replaying it. The difference this makes is decisive. Many lives are not broken by a single impact, but by the way an impact continues to be summoned. Some people make an error and are required to account for it repeatedly. It becomes a reference point in every evaluation. The error acquires duration and hardens into identity. Others make a similar error and are not followed by it. The trail ends. The act remains true, but it does not become the organising centre of a life. The difference lies not in the person, but in whether surrounding structures keep the moment alive. Systems decide. Some legal records expire, while others remain permanently accessible. Some files close automatically. Others are designed never to close. A life may continue or constrict, based entirely on whether a system disengages. This is not about justice or intent. It is about design. It is about whether an event is allowed to remain an event or is converted into a permanent condition through repetition. Social environments perform similar work. In some contexts, people are allowed to become ordinary again. Their past ceases to introduce them. Stories stop circulating. Attention moves elsewhere. In other contexts, the past is continually reactivated. Identity calcifies around what happened, not because it was decisive, but because it is repeatedly invoked. Loss behaves in the same uneven way. Some losses arrive alone. They hurt, they alter a life, but they do not summon further loss behind them. Other losses initiate a pattern. One absence leads to another. What breaks these lives is not the first removal, but the refusal of removal to end. Continuance is the absence of accumulation. It is the reason some lives fracture and then move on, not because the fracture was small, but because it was not continually reactivated. The past remains part of the record, but it does not monopolize the future. The axis complete, a lens for clear seeing. Together, these four conditions describe the full action of the exterior axis. Constraint and consequence describe pressure and gravity, how the world limits and responds. Latitude and continuance describe room and permission, how the world sometimes allows and forgets. None cancel the others. A person may live with severe constraint and still have latitude in one domain, or face heavy consequence in one moment and experience continuance in another. They appear unevenly, unpredictably, and without moral logic. Within the wider ghost universe, this framework prevents a quiet distortion. Without an exterior axis, interior steadiness can begin to sound sufficient, as though presence alone should protect, soften, or redeem. That implication, however unintentional, is powerful. The exterior axis corrects it without rejecting interior truth. Presence remains real. Recognition remains valuable. Neither is mistaken for immunity, and neither is burdened with the responsibility of making the world fair. It also prevents the opposite distortion, where circumstance alone is treated as destiny. The ghost universe does not deny interior life, agency, or meaning. It refuses to pretend that these operate in a vacuum. A life is shaped at the crossing of what is lived inwardly and what is imposed outwardly. Neither axis explains the other away. This document exists to name that crossing clearly, not to instruct and not to console, but to orient. Many people already live with an unspoken sense that something presses on their lives, that presence alone does not dissolve, and that something occasionally gives way without being earned. The exterior. Axis gives language to that recognition without turning it into judgment or program. In this way, the ghost universe remains what it has always been, a way of telling the truth about lived reality without demanding improvement, optimism, or resolution. The world continues to act. Lives continue to be shaped unevenly. Awareness continues to matter without being sufficient. To hold all of this at once is not a solution. It is simply an honest way of seeing what is already here.